talk about what Arnie Duncan said about Hurricane Katrina. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to the New Orleans public schools. That's the same attitude that they're taking to Haiti right now. That earthquake was the best thing that happened to the public schools because it's going to now bring transformation. And I've since found out that the very man, Paul Vallis, who was shipped into New Orleans to privatize the schools there and is now overseeing the schools, is now the advisor to the Interdevelopment Bank in recreating the Haitian school system. So guess what kind of schools that they have on offer there for Haiti. So it's a bleak picture to me. I think the previous speakers are right. We're up against a huge challenge. And usually I like to end my remarks by saying, well, the hope is in two things. One is that while they have all the money, we have vast numbers, right? And the other thing we have is the truth. We have two huge advantages that they don't have that we can play. But I want to switch it up tonight. That's still true, but there's something else true. We can take that money. We can take their money, and in fact, there's an initiative in Washington State that we must get behind. Yeah. Initiative 1098. Taxing the rich in this state, only people that make over $200,000 or more, and taking that money and making a fund of $2 billion that will go to fund public education here to lower the class size so that we can actually give the students the individual attention they deserve. So I encourage you to get involved with the groups that are up here, right? We have social equality educators. If you're a teacher in Seattle, you must get involved in our Progressive Union Caucus that's helping to strengthen the union. There's clipboards going around to get involved. Or if you're a parent, get involved with Sue and Nora in Education 2010 and parents across Seattle, and we can fight for, in the short term, 1098 and the funding that our schools deserve, and in the long term, a whole different vision for public education in our country. Thank you. Quick question for Diane too. If you know anything more about either the situation with the Haitian schools or in general, internationally, how they're trying to bring this race to the top model of corporate education beyond the borders of the U.S.
Jesse, thank you for your presentation. I met with a group of, it's called Education International. They're trade union leaders from all over Europe, Latin America. And they're all concerned about the same things. In fact, Australia and New Zealand contacted the educators there, the principals and teachers groups, because they felt that there was this pressure to do the data, do the numbers, do the testing, the pressure for competition, to reduce everything to data points. And I've heard from people in Europe that, and also in Brazil and Argentina, educators that are contacting me saying they're worried about the same trends emanating from the United States. The United States has such a powerful cultural influence that when you have this much media attention pushing one agenda and no dissident voices heard, it has a big international impact. I want to thank you for emphasizing the absence of the social context. You see in Waiting for Superman, the kids walking down these mean streets, and you get the words of the so-called reformers in your ears where they say, education is a civil rights issue of our day, but poverty doesn't matter. To try to put those two ideas together, they're totally inconsistent, because in Waiting for Superman, he has a film clip of Chuck Yeager, the pilot, and he says, everybody said you couldn't break the sound barrier, but Chuck Yeager did it. And what that's supposed to mean is poverty doesn't matter. And if you have good teachers in schools, poverty doesn't matter. So let's not talk about inequity of funding, because that doesn't matter. Let's not talk about kids who are homeless. Let's not talk about families who don't have the means to send their kids to school properly medicated with adequate nutrition. Those things don't matter. Those are excuses because Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. I spoke last week to the United Teachers of Los Angeles, that somehow these guys, and these women and guys, they have got everybody in the country talking about bad teachers. This is the mantra, bad teachers, that's our biggest problem. How are we going to evaluate teachers? How are we hold teachers accountable? And they have turned our gaze away from the 20% of children who live in poverty. And they would rather not talk about that, because that's a real problem. They don't know what to do about it, but they know how to fire teachers. So let's move on. Next speaker.
So our next speaker is Dorothea.
First, I want to thank Dr. Ravitch for taking the time out to spend some time with us and sharing. It really means a lot to us. I just want to bring it back to being a parent and having a child in the Seattle public school system. There's a couple things I just want to kind of bring back to the day-to-day issues. First of all, there was bill number 6696, which was basically raised to the top, that was approved by the legislature in Washington and in Olympia. Now, on the agenda, some of you might have heard about it. The agenda, the superintendent wants to bring to the table hiring Teach for America recruits. Suddenly, after some hoopla and reactions, that was kind of magically disappeared. Now, I do have questions, but there's something that there was one other thing I wanted to tell you about high-stakes testing before I ask my questions, and that is how I relate to high-stakes testing in terms of being a parent. I know what it's like for my daughter personally to take any kind of test. And these kids are smart. They get it. They know exactly what's going on in their schools. Once word gets out that their teachers are going to be evaluated, it's going to make them feel really, really bad. It puts a lot of pressure on our children. And as a parent, I find that completely unacceptable. I will do everything I can to make sure that at least I get a part for the money. Anyway, in terms of Teach for America, a couple of questions. One to Jesse and then one to Dr. Ravitch. Jesse, I understand that you were a Teach for America volunteer. Well, not a volunteer, okay. If you could briefly explain to us your experience and maybe help us understand how it is to be a Teach for America recruit instead of being a teacher that's certified and educated. That's one. And if you can keep it brief, that's great, because I want everybody in the audience to have a chance for questions. And then again for Dr. Ravitch, is your thoughts on Teach for America. Thank you.
I did do the Teach for America program in 2001. I taught in Washington, D.C., completed the 2-year program, and I stayed in that same school for a 3rd year before I came back here to Seattle to get my master's in education at the University of Washington. And I can say a little bit from my experience about the program. Personally, I have to say that experience in Washington, D.C. definitely changed my life, right? I decided to dedicate myself to public education and to, trying to transform it, to address the inequality that I saw, the fact that our kids didn't have a playground, the fact that our books were better for an archaeological study in the library, right, than like topical reference, right? These things are really disturbing, and it made me want to dedicate my life to changing the system. And so Teach for America allowed me entry to that. However, it absolutely in no way prepared me to be an effective educator in that classroom, and got absolutely, very, very little support, and made it incredibly difficult to actually do the changes that I wanted to in the classroom. So you get a 5-week boot camp training course where I went into the school in the Bronx, and in these 5 weeks, you're supposed to be ready to be a teacher, and what it did was weed out a lot of people, right? And a lot of the people that didn't survive that boot camp were the people that I wish, eventually would be teachers, but were turned off to it. These were many teachers who were raising questions like, well, don't we need to address the structural inequality? You're saying that I can solve all these problems myself in the classroom? And like, one of the suite mates that I bunked next to was an African American teacher who just couldn't stomach that they weren't addressing, structural racism, and he left, right? So these were some of the challenges. To think that a teacher is ready to teach in a 5-week course is just nonsense, right? And I knew that I had to go back to school to actually get the training, and unfortunately, most of my classmates weren't there to be teachers in the long term. They were there from elite universities because they wanted something that looked like they gave back to the community for a couple of years before they went to manage a hedge fund somewhere. They had aspirations of climbing, and this looked really good on a resume, right? That they taught in a poverty school for a while. And unfortunately, I did have to deal with a lot of students that had that, a lot of recruits to TFA that have that perspective. And so the idea that bringing in a few really untrained people into a high poverty school where you have no idea about the culture, how are you going to relate to those kids, right? That every single one of them has an uncle or a father that's dead or in jail, and without addressing structural racism and without giving you the tools to create engaging lessons to work with those kids is a fantasy, right? And so they tout Teach for America as a silver bullet to these problems that we're facing today. Get young, fresh teachers who want to change the world instead of these old teachers who have a lot of experience, right? And then that'll solve it all. In fact, studies show that you need at least 5 years before you hit your stride and really become a quality educator. And unfortunately, most TFA people don't make it that long, and that's why it became to be known TFA, Teach for a While.
What I'd like to do right now is turn to some of the questions from the audience, and they do connect perfectly with what we were just saying. What's that? Right, what I'm saying is I'm going to tie it in with these questions as well, because some questions are coming in about how do we accurately evaluate teachers, and I think how TFA fits into what makes a good teacher, what doesn't make a good teacher is all part of the same question.
Let her answer what she thinks of TFA.
Okay, sure. Dr. Ravitch, what do you think of Teach for America?
Well, I've thought about this a lot because in 2 weeks I'm going to Houston at the invitation of TFA and KIP. So I've thought a lot about what am I going to say to them.